Adat Netzer Yisra'il presenta Yisra'il TV, canal 26.3, Los Ángeles, California, uniendo pueblos.
Shabbat Shalom to all of you, to all my brothers and sisters around the world. Un Shabbat para todos. Thank you very much for joining us another Shabbat that we are bringing another Torah portion. This Torah portion is, of course, is very, very interesting because it gives you the idea that Yahweh is always in control. He has given us His Torah. His Torah is life for all of us. And this Parashat Mishpatim means judgments. The judgments, we will get into that in a minute, but just that overall, remember that every Shabbat we have what is called Parashats. Parashats are Torah portions that we are going through the entire Torah, the 5 books of Yahweh that gave to Moshe. So they are very important because in order for us to understand the Mashiach of Yisra'il, in order for you and I to understand Shaul, or what they call him Paul, or the entire Brit Hadashah, what they call the New Testament, it is important and it's a must for us to understand Torah. In order for us to understand the Brit Hadashah, we have to understand Torah. That way you understand, you will have a better perspective, a Hebraic perspective, so we understand the things that Yahweh is speaking to you through the Mashiach, Shaul, and so forth. So, and nevertheless, in the Hebraic mind, you will understand better and better. Not the way they've been teaching us for a long time on Sunday school with what is called the Greco-Roman Western mind, which is nothing but lies and deceit by the Vatican. So we have to be very careful about that. And it is time for us to open our eyes. It is time for us to go back, to do teshuvah, to repent, to return to what the Creator intended for us to give us, which is the Torah, and to understand and to believe in the true Mashiach of Yisra'il. So let's start. Before I do want to say shalom to Ramona in France, and Sakaya in Texas, Sam in Africa, and many, many more that are watching us. Our brother Kili in Puerto Rico, also as well, that he's watching too. Today's Shabbat. Remember, so many people are watching, and few that I can remember. So Shabbat to all of you. And let's start. Let's start with in Exodus or Shemot 21 through 21:1 to 24:18. It says, These are the Mishpatim, judgments, which you are to set before them. We have to understand something very important in the Torah. The Torah, they are Mishpatim, Chukim, and also the Torah itself. But you have to understand, this is a very important concept for us to understand, that in the whole entire Torah, there are so many things that are direct to the household, to a marriage, to kids, to civil judgments, and so forth. There's a lot of things that involve everybody. So it doesn't just isolate one group. The Torah is for everybody. So that's the good thing about it, because it really talks about every little thing they can think of. So that is very important. The Creator already seen everything that it needed to be done. Now, the word Mishpatim means rules or ordains, and it is derived from the Hebrew word Shabbat, that means to judge. Parashat Mishpatim is sometimes called the Sefer Chabri, which is the book of the covenant, since it contains over 11.5% of all the mitzvot or commandments found in the entire Torah. In other words, it's 53 out of 613. These Mishpatim includes a wide range of civil laws, criminal laws, ritual laws, financial and family laws. These civil laws are sometimes referred as the Ben Adam, okay, the between men and the fellow man. In other words, this has a lot to pertain between you and also you and your neighbor. So this is very important for us to understand this Mishpatim and to understand what covers everything in order for us to have shalom towards Yahweh, but also towards your fellow man, your neighbor. You must acknowledge these judgments. In order for us to respect each other, we must have acknowledged these judgments. See, the world right now is pretty much in chaos. In chaos indeed, because everything that, even though here in the United States it is civil and ordained and so forth, but it's still in chaos because a lot of things going on that has a lot to do with the Torah. The Torah says a man should not lay with a man, a woman should not lay with a woman, and it says very clear there. And today is in chaos because everything is what they call it freedom is not freedom in the Torah. It's actually violation of the Torah. So that's one example we can give, and many, many more that are introduced in this society. Well, we talked last week, this society, we are living here in the United States, it's Babylon. So whether we accept it or not, that's what the prophecy says, that it pinpoints this country. So let's continue on. In the written Torah, and I will make a note of this, the written Torah, that what is called the narrative and the mitzvot. The mitzvot are the Mishpatim, the Chukim, and the Adat, which is the laws, the decrees, and the testimonies. We will go on that. In the oral Torah is what our brothers call it the Takanot, the Cheserot, and Michayim. Now, we have to understand, very important, and I will make this clear, that what I'm showing right now is what our Jewish brothers have, this mentality that they separate these two, one the written Torah, one you see on the left side, and the one on the right, which is the oral. The written Torah is on the left, the oral Torah is on the right. But if you notice that the one on the left is definitely truth, definitely right, but the one on the right, I'm sorry, the one on the left is definitely right, but the one on the I'm sorry, I'm looking at the mirror here, the screen. The one on the left is the one is right. The one on the right, it is pretty much very shady, and we will get into that fully in detail, and we'll get into that. So I just want to make that clear and define what is oral Torah originally. Oral Torah originally, what the Torah says about the oral Torah, and also about the written Torah, which basically is there. We just have to find out where it is. But what is called today, which our Jewish brothers call it the oral Torah, is pretty much something that is pretty much made out of the thin air, which we will get into that. Now, once again, some of the things that are written on the Talmud, what is called the written Torah, some are good reference, and I quote unquote good reference, because it makes sometimes sense, some of the things that they said, but not entirely. Not entirely. I do talk about give reference on the written Torah, on the Talmud and so forth, but it's just as a reference. Okay, so I do want to make that clear for us to understand that Some of the things that are truth, cannot deny that, but not entirely. So we have to make that distinction, and always we have to put the Torah primarily as a number one. Now, let's look at what the oral Torah, the original oral Torah is. Bereshit 26 verse 5, because that Abraham obeyed my voice, look at what it says, and kept my charge, and look at what it says, and my chukim, which is statutes, and Mishpatim, judgments, and my Torah. The huge question that we should ask, and I'm sure you're asking yourself right now, wait a minute, I thought the Torah was given in the Mountain Sinai. When the Matam Torah, when the third month and the third day, when he gave the Torah. If you notice here, Yahweh said that Avinu Abraham obeyed his voice. He said that the Mishpatim, the Hukim, the decrees, the charge, the Torah. You see that? It wasn't written back in those days. That is what is called the oral Torah, the original oral Torah that was passed on from generation to generation. And we can pretty much see that is their original oral Torah. Now, we will get into what is called today, our Jewish brothers, the oral Torah, which they codified it in books after that, what is called the Talmud and so forth. But we will get into that and a little bit later. We just need to get into something that is rather important as well before we get into that. Now, look at what it says in 23:19 of Shemot or Exodus. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. Let's look another verse, 34:26 of Exodus or Shemot. You should not boil a kid in the milk in its mother. And also in the book of Devarim or Deuteronomy 14:21, again he says, you should not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Now we see three verses, three texts that the scriptures are pretty much giving an account on this, that Yahweh says you should not boil the kid in his mother's milk. Now there are three verses that the Torah is showing us, and remember what the Torah says, that 2 or 3, in order for something to be truthful, it has to be 2 to 3 or more testimonies, and we see 3 right now, and that means the Creator meant something serious here. So today, and the reason why I'm bringing this, because it is part of the Torah portion, the Parashat, today's Parashat. It is very important for me to mention that in the Jewish tradition today, what is called the Takanot, one of the laws that are taken out from these 3 verses that we are reading here, and they are they said that they understand that by not eating today, I'm talking about today, by not eating or combining a cheeseburger or meat with shake or anything, or milk or cheese, you cannot combine those two, because they understand that verse that we just read, that not to boil the kid in his mother's milk. Now, pretty much we have to understand something very important. The Creator is very straight when he says what he meant on his Torah, but sometimes men, they try to understand in his own way, and that's how they follow instead of doing research. Now, we will get into that right now to understand what does it mean to boil the kid in his mother's milk. And we will see it. Remember that Yahweh is taking our forefathers out of Mishpatim. When he does that, he gave his Torah. He gave his Torah to his people through Moshe, to our forefathers. And then what he's doing right now, he's giving his decrees, his Torah, and he's introducing this Torah to them, because obviously they've forgotten this remember, it's 430 years. They've forgotten these things. and they really immerse into idolatry in Egypt and so forth. So the Creator is reminding them about these things, and He is telling them, you are not to do what the other nations do. Look at what it says here, Jeremiah or Jeremiah 10:3. For the customs of the people are vanity. You see that? The customs, the traditions of men are nothing but vanity. Everything that they do is basically worthless. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that you can put so much pump into that or anything. It don't mean anything at the end of the day. It don't mean anything. It's just empty. You can have fun and so forth, but at the end of the day, it's all just emptiness. That's what vanity means. Emptiness. Emptiness of the heart. And what the Creator says here, look at what it says here. In Exodus 12:49 or Shema 12, there is one Torah for the native born and for the strangers who sojourns among you. You see that? There is one Torah from the native. That means for whatever is the natural, whoever is from Israel. Also the same thing. Whoever comes and wants to join, it will be one Torah. Only one Torah, no two Torahs, three Torahs, one teaching, one instruction. And the Creator is very clear here. So what He's trying to tell us here is that the Creator is pretty much making clear that the Torah is for everybody. Now let's get into the boiling the kid in his mother's milk. There was the rabbis extrapolated that the complex set of dietary laws which to display the prohibit observant Jews from mixing foods containing milk or milk byproducts with foods containing meat. The prohibition against mixing milk and meat is an essential element of the dietary laws of the kashrut or the kosher. It is a significant part of what we means to keep it kosher. Now, remember this, and it's very important. Kosher, the dietary laws that Yahweh has given us through the entire Torah still are to date. But some of the things that our Jewish brothers are following had nothing to do with the dietary laws. And this is very important, and we have to make the difference between those two. So what they said is that they cannot combine meat with milk or cheese or anything because it goes against the Torah. You are breaking Torah. You are not to do that, because they take that verse that we just read, 3 verses where it says you should not boil the kid in his mother's milk. But we will get into that for sure. And we'll get into that, why Yahweh says those things. Can we eat cheeseburgers? That would be the question, because if you see the cheeseburgers, it has cheese and what else? It has a meat. So it's dairy and meat. And the answer is, well, I won't answer right now until we get to the point where the Torah says it is or it is not allowed for us to do so. But let's get into that. Let's get into that, and let's get it to the point of what we are trying to bring. It was a custom with the ancient heathens or pagans when they had gathered all the fruits and take the kid and boil in the dam's milk. And then in a magical way go to about the sprinkle in their trees and their fields and their gardens and their orchards with it, thinking by these means that they should make them fruitful and bring forth more abundantly in the following year. Now we are looking at here the practice of the heathens. Remember that Yahweh said, this is my Torah. This will be for you, the native born, and also for the stranger, whoever is coming to join you. This will be one Torah, one instruction. You are not to do the ways of the world. Yahweh says very clear, when I introduce you to this land, you are not to follow their customs. You are not to mix between Yahweh's Avodah, which is a service, and their service. Today we see it a lot in the churches today, in the pagan churches today, in Sunday. Even on the Messianic, they introduce paganism with the Torah, and the Yahweh says very clear, you are not to do so. You are not to mix pagan with kadosh, what is set apart. Today is being done. Same thing back in those days. Yahweh says you're not to introduce these things. These things are kadosh. You are not to do their ways. So here we are looking at that this was a pagan practice, that it was done back in those days, that they did that. They even boiled the kid in his mother's milk, and that was a way of worship and also fertility for the next year. And remember that when you read every verse that we just read, where it pinpoints, it's talking about festivals. It's talking about their festivals. Yahweh says, these are my festivals that you said to put them in that kadosh, set apart assemblies, and you need to do it in the way I'm instructing you to do. But at the same time, you are not to do their ways. Their ways are pagan. This is what they practice for the next year. Yahweh said, these are my practice. These are my festivals. And remember that some of the festival had a lot to do with the spring, and also in other words, the spring, okay, and also the harvest, which is at the end of the year. So the same thing the heathens were doing, kind of the same thing in a different way, but doing it in a very pagan way. Yahweh asked to sacrifice an animal, but not that kind of way, a very, very terrific and very criminal way to do so. So Yahweh is not like that. So their fertility that they follow, it was in various traditions, like in the East, for in China and so forth. That's why you see a lot of Chinese eggs that they paint all over. They're very beautiful. One time it was given to me, and I already knew that this was a pagan fertility egg, and it was beautiful. It was a Chinese egg, but I knew what it was, and I just broke it and threw it in the trash, even though it was a gift. But I broke it and threw it in the trash because I know what that means. It was a fertility egg that was from the ancients. That you see the half a moon in there, the new moon. It also was back in those days. So the rabbit was an ancient fertility symbol that was done back in those days. Today is the same thing with Eastern, the Eastern hunt and so forth. All those are pagan festivals, pagan practice that are done today. You see that? So we have to open our eyes that this practice from the heathens are nothing but emptiness. Nothing. There's nothing to it. There's nothing at the end of the day that don't mean anything for us at all as our humans. You just practice. All you are doing is practicing to a demon. That's basically it. So here Yahweh said you should not do that. All these demons, these Elohim, are basically derived into paganism and what you can give them. Yahweh always ask for something is obedience rather than sacrifice. Yahweh says very clear, I'd rather have you do your obedience rather than an acceptance of sacrifice. Your obedience is more important. Their practice is that you have to give them your son. You have to burn them to fire. And these are the practices. It was sort of like a fertility, because in order for you to receive something, you have to give up something. Back in those days, it was so. Our northern kingdom was one of them. One of the reasons why the northern kingdom was cast into the nations, that's our forefathers, okay, by the way, is because they sacrificed children into Moloch, the guy that you're looking at here, this demon, and also the Asherah. They cast their sons and they pass them through fire. They burn them. And that's one of the reasons why in 2 of Kings says that's one of the reasons why Yahweh cast them to the nations, because they practice magic. Okay, the northern kingdom, the house of Yisra'il, They practice idolatry, magic, witchcraft. They burn the children into, and also, not only that, they practice cannibalism. Cannibals, okay, by the way, they practice all this nasty custom. Cannibalism, that's one of them, okay, that was part of their ritual, okay. I didn't know that. The idolatry and so forth, fornication, that was all that. It was all the nasty stuff they practiced. Yahweh said it was just an abomination completely, and that's one of the reasons why our forefathers were cast through the entire nations, the 70 nations. So all these were their nasty practice. Wherefore Yahweh forbade his people, the Hebrews, at the time of their ingatherings, to use any such superstitious or idolatrous rite. That's one of the reasons why Yahweh says, you are not to boil the kid in his mother's milk. These are pagan practice. You are not to do so. Let me ask you a question. Do you think they knew that? I mean, they knew their practice of their neighbors. You know that how they practice this pagan practice. They knew so. Like if I were to live next to another country or another neighbor, you don't think I would know their practice? I'll give an example. I used to live in another house, and my neighbor every Sunday he used to not boil, but he used to grill pig. Every Sunday he used to boil the pig in the backyard. And the way I knew is because I could smell the pig burning, grilling in the backyard. And so he barbecuing his pig, and one time I saw him bringing a huge pig into his household. So I knew his practice. Nevertheless, back in those days, they knew the practice when Yahweh said you should not boil the kids in his mother's milk, because they already knew that. They know the practice. So you're not to do so, Yahweh says. You are not to mix these things. The prohibition against cooking meat and milk together applies to all sheep, cattle, not only kid meat in the milk in his mother's mother. So rabbinic laws extended the prohibition to all other kosher meat and fowl. Not only would the flesh or animals like goats, sheep, cattle be prohibited from eating with dietary products, but so will be meat from kosher birds be prohibited from eating with their dietary products. In other words, what they're telling you is that anything that is meat, you cannot combine it with anything that is cheese or any milk or any dairy whatsoever. So that's what they're trying to tell you. So this is a prohibition that they came out with, understanding what the Torah says. But remember this, most of the stuff that Yahweh said to us in his Torah, speaks to us in his Torah, he does it very clearly. But we are trying to go a little bit beyond that, what he's trying to tell you. He means what he say, he means what he means. So he's very important that we understand that concept. A Canaanite or Ugarity text may picture the chief god demon El having a kid cooked in milk. The biblical law may thus be prohibited against eating something that was regarded as food for a deity. In other words, was another also way to please a demon is also bringing him food. That was also a sacrifice to the idols. Remember what Shaul says, that you should not eat anything that is sacrificed by the idols? I'll give you an example. New Year's food, Thanksgiving food, Christmas food, and so forth. Those are sacrificed to their idols. Remember, behind that festival, there is an idol. There is a demon. The purpose of bringing this food is to celebrate for this festival. So what do you think they sacrifice for? They offering for? To a demon. So you are not to do so. So that's what we have to be very careful. We have to be used in logic, the knowledge that Yahweh has given us, so we understand, we know better about these things, so we don't go ignorant about these things, so Yahweh can bless us more. Matthew 23:25. Look at what it says. Look at what Mashiach says on the Shem Tov Matithiyah, the Hebrew Matthew 23:25. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are filled with plunder and unrighteousness. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, so the outside of them become clean too. They were more concentrated in the outside appearance. And believe me, the outside is just like today. In LA are very, very famous for that. It's all about the appearance. The appearance is all about the what car do you drive, what house do you have, how much money do you have in your bank, and so forth. It's all about the appearance. But the inside is just nothing. It's all emptiness. The same thing back in those days. It was just all about appearance, how you look to the people, how you look outside, how you clean things, how they do things. But Mashiach is very clear. It's very clear. The reason behind the mitzvah, the command of Yahweh, is it was basically the inner self, how you are with the Creator. If you are inside with the Creator, right, doing the right thing, keeping Yahweh's commands and Torah, the outside is going to come out. That's what Mashiach says very clear here. In verse 26 says, blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup dish, so the outside of them become clean too. In other words, it has a lot to do with everything. It has to do with Brit Milah, with the circumcision. It has a lot to do with everything that you do as a Hebrew. It has to be the inner first, so the outside can come out. You cannot do this first if you're not inside first, knowledgeable about these things. It has to come out from the inside first. You need to do the inner examination first, the inner cleanliness first, so the outside can do too. So it's very important for this concept that Mashiach is bringing. And that's what back in those days, in the first century, they were doing. And the reason why I bring this verse is because we will get into what is called the takonot. The takonot are the rabbinical laws that are done today. We will get into that very soon. So from the ancient times until today, the prohibition about seeding the kid in his mother's milk has generated a vast amount in interpretive literature. Much of it focuses on what the kind of animal is specified. The Hebrew word gedi means kid, and another word for the young goat. But when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, in the Septuagint, around 300 BC, the word was translated amos, which generally refers to a lamb or sheep, but occasionally to a goat. So here, basically, we are looking at just the translation-wise, and we are looking at what the Torah says and what the translation to the Septuagint was translated to the word for a goat. So it's basically the same thing. So I'm just giving an extra info here, so we take notes of that. Philip of Alexandrian, Jewish philosopher, at the turn of the era said that the word referred to a domesticated animal acceptable for sacrifice. You see that? More than 1,000 years later, the great medieval Jewish commentator Rashi came to the same conclusion. In other words, what are in the first century, some of the rabbis, they believed that this was indeed as a pagan sacrifice, that it was basically a ritual, a pagan ritual from the heathens and the Canaanite heathens, that they did this ritual, and they understood that those verses that we read in the very beginning about the boiling the kids in his mother's milk. They knew that, But as the time went along, they changed their minds. They changed their minds until today, and that's what we see their practice. Both believe that in the prohibition of its origin, not in dietary, see that, practice, but in the ritual sacrifice practice. Philo thought that the prohibition applied only when the animal was cooked in its mother's milk. The rabbis quickly ruled, however, that the flesh of any animal, not just goats, could be mixed with any milk, not just in its mother. You see that? So in other words, they can rule out what the Torah says, and then now we can just make up our own, and that's what it is now. So that's what's one of the Takanots today. So one tablet from around 1300 BC, which tells the birth of two minor gods, dawn and dusk. It is a full canonized culted instruction inspired by early interpreters of the tablet decided that one of the lines mentioned is slaughtering a kitten's milk. Although there was no mention of this mother's milk, a line seemed to prohibit the Maimonides insight. The Maimonides is basically one of the rabbis who basically thought before this tablet came out that it was basically a pagan practice, which he was right, and also the archaeological findings were right too as well. Let's look. Before I go on to this verse, let's find out what the Torah says about all this. I'm bringing all this information and so forth, and I do want to bring enough information so you convince yourself that this ritual, what Yahweh was speaking to our forefathers was basically a pagan ritual. Nothing to do with dietary, nothing to do with by eating kosher. Has nothing to do with that. But rather, it was a pagan practice. But let's look a verse where Yahweh says the opposite, that we can actually eat. We can actually eat a cheeseburger that has cheese and and meat. Let's look. We pretty much eat something that is kosher, of course, not something that is not kosher, but something that is kosher we can eat, and we can combine with anything that has milk on it, or anything that has dairy on it. So let's look what the Torah says. Bereshit 18 verse 7. And Abraham ran to the herd and brought some of the herd, tender and good, and gave it to a youth, and he hurried to prepare it. He hurried to cook it. And he took, what he said? What does it say in red? Butter and milk in the cup which he had dressed, and he set them before them, in other words, the angels, and they did eat it, and he stood by them under the tree. In other words, they all ate. It was a customary, tradition that every visitor that they came to your household, to your doors, you had to prepare something to eat. Just like today, when we receive, like for example, in my wife's, she's Filipina, they are very introduced. The tradition is very strong tradition that they have to give you food. They cannot leave you. They're not let you go unless they give you food. They have to prepare you food. You have to take food home and so forth. That's a very customary, a good customary welcome to any visitor. Back in those days, the Hebrew, custom was our Abino Abraham received these angels, and what is it that they prepare? Goat, you see that? A herd, a calf. They prepare milk. They combine those two. We see a great example in the Torah. Remember that Avinu Abraham kept the Mishpatim, the Chukim, you see the entire Torah. We read the verses. So nevertheless, he did not ignore all these things. He knew about the Torah. It was the oral Torah, the original oral Torah. So that is very important as well. So we see a very perfect example how the Creator is speaking to us, and is telling you pretty much that it's something that is truth, something that we cannot deny this. So Devarim, or the book of Deuteronomy 4 verse 1, and now, O Yisra'il, listen to the Hukim, you see that, and the Mishpatim, the statutes and judgments which I am teaching to you, you see that? The Almighty of your forefathers is giving you. In other words, Yahweh is basically giving this Torah to our forefathers, and this is statutes and judgments that are given to our forefathers, that are given to our forefathers. They are teaching this to our forefathers. You see, Moshe is giving this to our forefathers. Devarim 4:2. You should not add, in the same chapter, look at what it says. You should not add the word which I command you, nor take it from it. To keep the commands of Yahweh, your Almighty, which I command you. In other words, what Yahweh says, I am giving you this Torah, you should not take, you should not add. Very simple. You should keep it as is. You should keep it as is. Yahweh is saying very clear here that the Torah, it is good as it is. You don't have to take, you don't have to add, you don't have to do anything. All you got to do is just follow. It's just there for us to follow. What's happening today is that there is a lot of things that are being added to it. Do you know that in the first century, just in the Mizbah, in the command of keeping the Shabbat, observance of to observe the Shabbat, do you know how many laws, rabbinical laws, they had added in the first century, the Pharisees? Over 1,000. Over 1,000 laws. Besides what the Torah says, besides what Yahweh says, you should keep my Shabbat. You should not do this, you should not do that. Very good. But what the rabbinical, what the Pharisees did back in those days, they added 1,000 plus more laws, man-made laws, that were totally against what Yahweh says. So it was, do you know that even today, I didn't know this, even today, if you go to Israel, do you know that there is certain parts where they keep Shabbat? But some people, most of the Jewish brothers, they do not keep Shabbat. It's astonishing as it is. They do not keep Shabbat. And you ask them, why did you not keep Shabbat? And they will basically tell you that is a burden to us. So many laws, I can keep that Shabbat. I cannot keep it. In other words, the Shabbat is supposed to be a joyful Shabbat. We're supposed to rejoice ourselves in Shabbat. It's a blessing, Shabbat. It's a blessing from Yahweh. It's a sign. It's a mark for us in Yahweh. So it shouldn't be a burden. But because these rabbinical laws has come upon today, that it becomes a burden to every Jew. And not for us, of course, but every Jew becomes a burden for us, because they have to follow this and this and this and that. It has nothing to do with the Torah. So it's very sad indeed. Proverbs 30 verse 6, do not add to his word, he had not reproved you and you be found a liar. Do you see that? Proverbs 30 verse 6, do not add to his Torah, and he did not reprove you and you be found a liar. In other words, if you add to his word, you become a liar. And this is what's happening today. Exactly what's happening today. People add to his word. We cannot add, we cannot take. Yahweh is very clear. He says that even in Revelation, that plagues will come to those who add and to take from this book. Very clear. We cannot, it cannot be any clearer than that. Yahweh is very clear. 4:5 of Devarim of Deuteronomy. See, I taught you the Hukim and Mishpatim as Yahweh my Almighty has commanded me to do them, you see that, in the midst of the land where you are going to possess. In other words, once again, Yahweh is reminding through Moshe that all these Torah, Mishpatim, Hukim, Torah, all these decrees, statutes, judgments are good for them. Why? Because they are about to do them, and because they are about to be introduced to Eretz Yisra'il, to the land of Yisra'il, that's their possession. So they are to inherit this land, but at the same time to inherit this great Torah. Devarim 4:6, and you should keep and do them, for it shall be your wisdom, do you see that? And your understanding before the eyes of the people who hear all these statutes. And they shall say, this great nation is a people wise in understanding. Do you see that? Because we follow the Torah. The Torah says very clear that Yahweh, through the Torah, gives us understanding, gives us wisdom. And not because we want to boast ourselves, saying, look, I am very wise. No, it's because when you do so, when you do them, when you execute the Torah, when you do the Torah, when you observe the Torah, you become wise. And people notice that. You don't have to boast yourself. People notice that. And they will. In Proverbs said, let the stranger praise you, not your lips. Very simple. Very simple. Yahweh says that this Torah is understanding and wisdom for all of us. We cannot deny this. 4:8 of Devarim, of Deuteronomy, and who is great nation, whose Hukim and Mishpatim are as the righteous, as all the Torah which I said before today, for you today. Whose this nation is basically the nation of Yisra'il. Yahweh says that we become wise in understanding by understanding and doing the action, do the Torah, execute the Torah. The action and also the understanding become very powerful thing about us and about Yahweh by giving us this great Torah. So Yahweh says very clear that we become a very understanding nation. Now, before we come here, I do want to mention something about the Takanot. And now, today, before I introduce you to this, today it's rather the second part of this is basically something that I do want to talk about, because it is rather important, rather extremely important for us to understand why Yahweh says that that His Torah is #1 priority, nothing else, nothing else. And I always, as I mentioned earlier, the original oral Torah that was given to our forefathers, it was passed on through generation and generation. We saw the verse earlier through Abinu Abraham. He kept the Torah, he kept the Mishpatim, he kept the Hukim. Now, what is called today the oral Torah, it was created in Babylon, in the exile Babylon, when they were in captivity for 70 years. They created this Talmud. The Talmud is what they call it, the oral Torah. There is a Jerusalem Talmud also too, but there is a Babylonian Talmud, and it speaks about a lot of thinking about the Torah. Do you know that today every Jewish person that you can ask, especially the Orthodox, you can ask them, do you study the Torah? And they will tell you, no, I study the Talmud. The Talmud is basically a Torah according to them, but it's not the same. The Talmud is basically comments about the Torah through the rabbis. Comments about the Torah comments about the Torah through the rabbis. The rabbis, they said this, and the other one said no, but this is one, and the other one said no, but this. So it's a lot of comments, they contradict each other and so forth. Some things are good, don't get me wrong. As I said before, some of the references are good, I take it into account, but some things that don't make any sense whatsoever, and some things go completely against the Torah. So in other words, we have to be very careful, and that's why I'm bringing this topic about the Takanot. Let's get into that. Takanot are enactments or decrees of the rabbi invented out of the thin air with no scriptural justification, simply new religious laws framed with the authority of the oral law, unabashed violation of the Varim 4:2 and 12:32. Now, what will Yeshua do? The Judaism dogma or the Yahweh's written words? What will he do? And of course, he will go with the Torah, of course. He did that in the first century. Now, Matithiyah or the Shem Tov, actually, I take it back, I'm sorry. In the King James Version, okay, 23 verse 1, look at what the King James Version said, and we'll compare with the Hebrew version. And spake Jesus to a multitude and to his people, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses. Now, I'm just reading the King James Version, okay? Don't be bashing at me. We're gonna compare with the Hebrew version. Back in those days, this was in the first century. This was literally the seat of Moses. Every synagogue had a chair there, and that was the chair of Moses. Basically, that chair, the leader sat on it, and he had the authority of Moshe. We are looking at here one of the relics that was found, and this is basically all the seat of Moses. Mashiach is saying those things, but here in that version, the King James Version says that they sit on the seat of Moses. Now, in the King James, look at what it says again. All they said, 23 verse 3 of Matthew, all therefore whatsoever they bid you do observe, that observe and do. But do not you do after their words, for they said as you do, and do not do. Let me ask you a question. Does it make any sense? It doesn't make any sense to me, because according to this Jesus, this Greco Jesus in the King James Version, he says, whatever, they're all therefore, whatever they said, you observe and do, and do not do and observe their works, for they said as you they not do. In other words, it is contradicting itself. It says you should do what they said, but at the same time you should know what they do. Either it is or it isn't. It is contradicting itself right here. So let's look at what the Shem Tov of Matithiyah says. Look at the Shem Tov Matithiyah. This is the word they said in Hebrew, okay, which is plural. Plural is yomru. Yomru means they said. But let's look at what the Shem Tov of Hebrew Matthew, okay, says, and look at what the word says. Below, the word yomer means he said instead of they said. You see makes the difference? One is singular, the other one's plural. Here it says he said. In other words, we see a great difference here. One, that King James Version says they said, what they said you should do. But look at what the Hebrew version says. The Shem Tov Hebrew says, Matthew 23 verse 1. Then Yeshua spoke to the crowd and to these disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees have sat down the Moses' seat. We saw it earlier. Then all things, whatever he said. Who's he? Who sits on that? Whose seat is that? Moshe's seat. So, in other words, what he said, who? Moshe. Who's Moshe? Is referring to the Torah. Whatever the Torah says, look what it says, whatever, then all things, whatever he, Moshe, or the Torah tells you to keep and do, but do not do according to their, who's them? The scribes and the Pharisees. Works, for they talk and they don't do. In other words, what he said, who? Moshe. Who's Moshe? He's the one giving the Torah. Whatever the Torah says you should do, but do not do what they said. What they do and they don't They say they don't do at all. So here we see a lot of clearance on this verse. What happened in the first century, brothers and sisters, is that this line of the Pharisees, by the way, Pharisee means the separated ones. 23:13 of Matthew, Shem Tov, look at what it says here. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven before men, and you do not enter, nor you allow these entering to go in it. In other words, you don't enter, you don't let anybody enter. You don't spread the Torah, you don't teach the Torah the right way, nor you want to do the same thing. So it's very clear here that Mashiach, Yahushua, it's very clear here, where it's clearing up our minds that the first century was happening the same thing. A lot of things were happening in the first century. Mashiach is clearing this. Matthew 5:17. We know these verses. Do not think that I came to annul the Torah or the prophets. I did not come to annul, but to fulfill. Truly I say to you, on the heavens and earth it shall pass away, nor away shall one jot or any stroke pass away from the Torah until all comes to pass. Here Mashiach is very clear. The Torah still abides today. It's not gone away. Still confines on our hearts to do so. Torah is life for all of us. We cannot deny that Yahweh has given us the Torah for us to do so. It's life for us. The Mashiach is giving us the purpose why we should keep the Torah. Why Yahweh has given us. He's giving us the definition, the proper interpretation of the Torah. And that's what it's all about. So here is very important. 15:1, look at what Mashiach says. Then the scribes and the Pharisees came to Yeshua from Jerusalem, saying, why do the scribes transgress the traditions of the elders? Do you see that? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. Here we see there is various traditions that they did back in those days. A lot of traditions. Once again, Shabbat only have over 1,000. Do you imagine the rest of the Torah? They have so many traditions that they invented out of the thin air. And they asked the Mashiach, why did your scribes do not, why did they transgress the traditions of the elders? Look at what the Mashiach said in reply. By answering, he said, or Mashiach, to them, why do you also transgress the commands of Yahweh in account of your tradition? Do you see how the comeback is? The comeback of Mashiach was the ultimate. We cannot deny that. They asked him a question. Remember this is a Hebraic mind. When they ask you a question, anybody, you have to ask them, you have to respond, you have to answer with another question. That's standardized in every Hebrew. When they ask you a question, you have to answer, or you have to reply with another question. The Mashiach is doing it here. The answer by saying, why do you also transgress the command of Yahweh in your account of tradition? They shut up. They couldn't say a thing because they knew that Mashiach was right. So, verse 3, by answering, he said to them, why do you transgress the tradition? Now, the school of Hillel and the Shammai, there were two schools in the first century. It started schools of study of Torah 30 to 60 years before the Mashiach. In other words, whatever the schools or the sets, what they call the sets or the schools of Torah, the Sadduceans, the Hellenians, the Pharisees, there was a lot of groups of Torah back in those days. They started around 30 to 60 years prior to the Mashiach came to the first century. Yahushua, or book of Joshua 7:16. Sorry, I take it back. In John 7:16, Yeshua answered to them and said, my teaching is not mine, but for the one who sent me. Who sent them? Yahweh. So whatever was he teaching, it wasn't his own. It was Yahweh's. All he was doing, he was refining the Torah. John 8:28, for myself I do nothing, but as my Father taught me, these things I speak. In other words, all he was doing, he was just transmitting already what was already spoken by Yahweh. He was just defining the Torah and better understanding. Remember that Moshe gave the Torah, but Yeshua is the one who interpreting the Torah for us. Jewish Encyclopedia, Volume 2, page 337, even when the rabbis decide that the left should be the right and the right should be left, when they are mistaken or misled in their judgment, they must be obeyed. In other words, what he's telling you here is that even if they are wrong, you have to do it. Even if they are wrong, you have to do it. Whatever they say, you must do, the rabbis. That's what they said. But we know that it's totally wrong. We know that it's totally wrong. Exodus 23, verse 2, you should not follow, look at what the Torah, you should not follow a multitude to do evil, neither you should bear witness in a cause to turn aside after a multitude to what? To pervert justice. Yahweh is very clear here. I'm telling you, the Torah is very clear. It's clear in our minds where he said that you should not turn where the multitude, you should not follow the multitude to do evil. You should not turn aside after a multitude to pervert justice. This is what's happening today. The Torah is being perverted by adding to the Torah, by adding rabbinical laws that the Torah has nothing to do with it. The Torah has never said it. Yahweh has never spoken. So here we see a clear example. Devarim, or Deuteronomy 31:12, assemble the people, the man, the woman, the little ones, and the sojourners who is within your gates, so that they learn to fear Yahweh your Almighty, and to guard, to do all the words of the Torah. Do you see that? Here is very clear. Yahweh said that all men must listen to the Torah, not just the leader, not just the congregation. All men, you see that? Little ones, small ones, all of them have to listen to Torah. Do you know that today in the Orthodox community, if I'm just giving an example. If I'm an Orthodox Jew and I go to a rabbi and I said, can I study the Torah? He says, no, it is forbidden for you. If you study Torah, you open the Torah, it is to the point that it's punishable by death, or you can die, in other words. So it is something that they infuse this to every Orthodox Jew today, that they cannot open the Torah to study it. That's why a lot of things that they ignore. Do you know that they ignore a lot of things in the Torah? Do you know that? Because they always infuse, they always concentrating in learning the Talmud. The Talmud is what they call the Oral Torah, the comments of the Torah through the rabbis. That's all they learn. That's all they never mention anything about the Torah, because they don't learn Torah. That's the amazing thing, and a shocking thing too. So here in the Torah we see that all men had to learn Torah. Men, women, little ones, even the strangers within the gates, all listen to the Torah, so they all fear Yahweh, so they all to do guard to the words of the Torah. Do you see that? All men. 31:13 of Devarim, of Deuteronomy, and the children who do not know it, look at that, should hear and learn to fear Yahweh your Almighty as long as you live in the land that you are passing over the Jordan to possess it. In other words, those who are not there, or those who don't know, or those who will be born in the future, you need to teach them Torah. They need to hear Torah. Now, it is very important that back in those days, only few people have a scroll Torah. It was the king, okay? It was the king had to have a copy of the Torah and on his side to do the right ruling. He just couldn't. I mean, remember that the purpose of a king is to make a judgment to the people, not just to rule, but to give a judgment. So he needed to have the Torah right next to him. Also, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, he needed to have a Torah as well, and of course the leader too. So here is very, very clear indeed. In order, and the reason why I give these examples that only few parties can have a Torah is because it was very expensive to have a Torah. It was very expensive to have a Torah. Back in those days, you needed many barrels of ink, one person to be sitting there for over more than a year to write the Torah, and also sheep's skin to make a Torah. So it was rather expensive, and people didn't have a lot of money to go over that. Only a few people have a scroll of Torah. So that's why Yahweh said, you need to gather all these people to listen to the Torah, to the words of the Torah. Yahweh says once again, you should not add to the word which I command you. You should not take away from it. Very straight up. The Takanot, once again, are enactments that they give out of thin air. Now, Flavius Josephus, one of the Jewish writers, view that the Pharisees, what I would not, here's what he said. What I would not explain of this is that the Pharisees have delivered to the people a great many observances by succession from their fathers, which are not written in the Torah of Moses. For they are reason that it is the Sadducees reject them, and they said that we are to have esteemed those observances to be obligatory, which are in the written word, but are not to observe, are derived from the traditions of our forefathers. The book of the Antiochus, this is the reference that is giving. So here we can see another reference of Flavius Josephus about these observances back in those days in the 1st century. The Babylonian Talmud, my son, be careful observing the rabbinical decrees even more than the Torah. Look at what it says. The Torah contains prohibitions, but anyone who violates a rabbinical decree is worthy of death. It's in Talmud B. I'm giving you the examples. I'm giving you what they said in their Torah, about their own Talmud. They said that these writings are more important than the Torah itself. Once again, they said that the writings, look at the rabbinical decrees, even are more than the Torah, and the Torah contains prohibitions, but anyone who violates the rabbinical decree is worthy of death. That's what they said. That's what they teach in today. And it is very sad. Ramban's introduction to the Mishnah. These are look at what they said. What he said, Ramban's, one of the rabbis back in after the 1st century. These are, if there were 1,000 prophets, and all of them in the statutes of Elijah and Elisha, giving a certain interpretation, and 1,001, remember over there is 1,000, and here is 1,001 rabbis giving the opposite interpretation, you should incline to the majority of the law is according to the 101 rabbis, not according to the 1,000 venerated prophets, only from the rabbis who are men of logic and reason. This is what Ramban says. In other words, what majority wins, in other words. But what we read earlier in the Torah, it says, if do not follow majority to pervert justice. Do you see that? Do you see the contradiction here? Do you see that it's clashing here? Who do you think you should believe? Of course, you should believe the Torah. The Torah says you should not follow the majority. The majority will pervert the justice. The Babylonian Talmud says in Pesachim 1:1a, and even if the view of the precepts cannot notify each other, that applies only to a biblical precept with a biblical precept. If a rabbinical precept with a rabbinical precept, but in the case of a scriptural and rabbinical precept, the rabbinical precept comes and nullifies the scriptural one. In other words, once again, we see another verse where it says that they have the priority rather than Torah. The Torah comes last and they become first. Another example of this, the rabbis are the modern Pharisees. The Babylonian Talmud, you see the reference, Kedushim 66a. So we see verses after this, evidence. The iniquity of the rabbis. A certain Gentile came to Shammai, and the Gentile said to him, how many Torahs do you have? To Shammai, one of the rabbis, and he answered, 2, the written Torah and the oral Torah. So that's what he said back in those days. But we know the original Torah is the Torah that was given to Moshe, period. Once again, the original Torah, the oral original Torah, is the one who was passed on from Adam all the way to Abraham, and Abraham passed it on all the way unto to the forefathers, and Yahweh, once again, he made it, codified it in the tablets and so forth. So here we are looking at what the Talmud says, that they have the written Torah. That's not the written Torah at all. The oral Torah, that's not the original Torah at all. So we have to make that clear. Iniquity number 2, if they instruct you to that your right is left and your left is right, you must obey them. In other words, whatever they say, you must do. That's according to the rabbis. Look at what they said. We are almost done. If it is in heaven, you should not say, you should not go up in as a heaven and bring unto us and make us here so they might do it. In other words, they taken off out of context Devarim, or book of Deuteronomy 30:12, where Yahweh says that the Torah is here on earth, not in heaven, on earth. So in other words, they said that they have the authority and Yahweh doesn't. That's what they said. Look at below. The Pharisees said that they say that because the Torah is not in heaven, that is was given to Moshe as Sinai, therefore he, Yahweh, no longer had authority, but only the rabbis. This is the teachings at the time of the Yahushua. You see that? These are the teachings that are teaching since back in those days until now. So in other words, this is what they teaching today, and believe me, it has no basis in the Torah whatsoever. Who do you think you should obey? Them or the Torah? Of course, the Torah comes number 1. Matthew 15 verse 4. Look at Mashiach is giving a great example of keeping Torah. For Yahweh commands, saying, honor your father and your mother, and the one of speaking evil to a mother or father, let him put to death. He said that. But you said, any more who says to you, your father and mother, my offerings, whatever, have gained by me, and he does not need to honor his father and mother. I'm going to pause here. Here, brothers and sisters, here, back in the 1st century, the rabbis understood that honor your father and mother was giving korban, an offering. In other words, they gathered this much of money or korban, and they gave it to their parents and said, okay, this is it, and I'm free. I don't have to do anything to you. I don't have to, because remember, honor your father and mother, the Hebraic mentality, and it's always been since Yahweh gave this, the Torah. Honor your father and your mother was that you need to provide to your mother and your father spiritually, emotionally, financially, even though you're married, even though you have kids, even though you're old, even though they are old, you need to provide all these things to your parents until the day they die. For them, to the rabbis, they understood that it was too much of a burden. I just rather invent this decree, this rabbinical decree, and we're just gonna have to make one-time deal to our parents, and that's it. I don't have nothing to do with my parents anymore. Look at verse 6 says, and in no way he honors his father and mother. And you annulled the command of Yahweh on account of your tradition. Do you see that? And you annulled the command of the Mishpat of Yahweh on account of your tradition, because they invented this idea that Yahweh, that according to them, it was better to make their own rule out of the thin air, just to bring this korban to their parents, and that was one-time deal, and that's it. They don't have to take care of their parents for no longer. It was a burden for them, so they annul the command of Yahweh. Now, we have come to a close, and I am very happy that this Shabbat has come, another Parashat, another time for us to reflect in the Torah, in this Torah portion. Believe me, there's so much to every Torah portion, but we can only cover so much, and because it's everlasting, in-depth knowledge in it. But the little that we have, we can bring it, and hopefully next year we can bring a better and more insights on Parashat Mishpatim. But what we have so far is enough for today's Shabbat. So thank you very much for joining me on this Shabbat, and we will see you. I will bring another teaching throughout the week, and it will be a surprise. Okay, so thank you very much for all of you, and have a happy Shabbat and a blessed one too. Moreh, Rapha'Yah, and Shabbat Shalom.
Adat Netzer Yisra'il presenta